Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining the Great Dynamics podcast again. Today with us is Thomas Pecora. He has spent more than 34 years in security profession and is a former CIA Senior Security Officer who retired after 24 years of service protecting CIA personnel. He managed large security programs and operations on multiple continents and in multiple war zones. He's experienced in protective operations, crisis management, personal and physical security, and counterterrorism. He also served as Chief of Security for the CIA in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, as well as postings in the Philippines. During his career, Tom received the Intelligence Star, the CIA's second highest honor for valor awarded for a voluntary act or acts of courage performed under hazardous conditions or conditions of grave personal risk. He also received the Career Intelligence Medal for exceptional achievements that substantially contributed to the mission of the CIA. Since his retirement in 2013 as the Director of Pecora Consulting Service, Tom has provided services to a number of companies to include security vulnerabilities, threat assessments in Asia and the US, as well as situational awareness training and curriculum development. He's an adjunct professor at the Wright State University, Boonshoff School of Medicine, where he taught situational awareness courses for undergraduate and graduate level students. Tom also has provided firearms training, personal safety, crime prevention, avoidance, as well as executive protection guidance and skill training. He's the published author of the book Guardian: Life in the Crosshairs of the CIA's War on Terror, a historical memoir of his career in the CIA. Very long and illustrious career, Tom. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, Tom, tell us a little bit more about yourself. Like, how did you start off in this career?
Oh, it's kind of a strange beginning. I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is about 100 miles north of Chicago. It's kind of an industrial area. And after college, I didn't really have very good prospects in the career field. So I went to grad school, and after that I was coaching wrestling. I was waiting for my big break, and it came in the form of an ad in the newspaper on my local paper. So I applied. It was for a job with the CIA. Didn't go into any detail about specifically what area. And about a month later, I got a call. I thought it was one of my friends giving me the razz. So I almost hung up on the guy. Thank God I didn't. And I went through the hiring process, polygraph, background investigation, and I ended up being selected into the security field, the career track, which is known as the MDSO. And it's a career track that is a conglomerate of different jobs. Mm-hmm. And I started out doing background investigations in my first job. And then things got interesting after that.
All right. Well, please tell us more about that, because I think a lot of people, or at least the people that know about CIA security, have heard of, particularly people listening to this podcast, GRS, Global Response Staff. But you started off as doing background checks, which is a bit of a different, more of a CI role.
It's right. Kind of like glorified HR. And I love HR, don't get me wrong. It was just that as a security officer, you found out, I thought I was going to be doing the locks and guns and things like that. And it really wasn't. And I was doing background investigations on engineers and people working in the aerospace industry that were, and it was kind of boring, to be honest. I was expecting more James Bond. And then an opportunity came across the screen on my computer one day, looking for people who were interested in doing protective operations in an overseas environment. And it was a new element that was being fielded. It was actually being created. Mm-hmm. And so I applied, got selected, and I was in the first official training class, what was called the Special Protective Operations course. And after you graduate the course, you become part of the cadre. A group of individuals who are trained and available when assignments come up, and they may call you up and say, are you available to do this assignment in, for example, Somalia, which is one of my first assignment overseas was in 1993 in Mogadishu, Somalia. So this unit was a classified operational element, and it began with some activities in the Philippines where there was a threat on some of our personnel. As a result of that, they decided that they needed to form a unit that could provide protection low profile protection for our case officers who are going out to collect information as part of their duty in hazardous places, not in the normal, places where they can operate without support. Now, I have to caveat everything that I tell you with the information that I'm providing has been cleared by the CIA's Publication Review Board as part of when I get to write my book. I just want people to understand that this is...
You're not sharing.
I'm not
material.
talking out of school.
Yeah.
And this has all been approved. And it's the history of the unit that eventually became famous with the Benghazi attack in Libya in which became the subject of a book and a movie called 13 Hours, The Secret Soldier in Benghazi. And so I wrote a book about the origin story because I was in the first official training class of that element, which originally was called the POC, Protective Operations Cadre. And later on, about 1999, we changed our name to the Global Response Staff. Yeah.
So you mentioned something of personal interest and professional interest to me there. You said your first outing was to Somalia.
Yes.
And you said 93, so that was Black Hawk Down.
Correct. I was there just before Black Hawk Down.
So what was your experience like? For what you can say? Yeah.
The best way to start off is it was like Mad Max.
Yeah.
Somalia had just went through a revolution.
Yeah.
A civil war. Was a society that had collapsed. And we were providing protection for our case officers. We were running around collecting. And at the time that I went in, we were Team 9, there was a serious threat on peacekeepers because of a variety of factors, one of which was the warlords that were being displaced by the U.S. military and other UN forces. They were no longer able to collect as much money through the black market. So they were starting to get desperate, and they started to attack different elements. At one point, one of the warlords, Mohammed Farah Adi, attacked a Pakistani convoy and killed a number of them. And at that point, he became the bad guy. And the UN put him on the most wanted list. And when I was there, that was one of the things our case officers were working on, were collecting intelligence to try to target and capture him. And we were assisting an element that came in, a ranger element, with a winky-rinky group of Delta Force operators hiding in the midst. The Black Hawk Down happened a couple weeks after I left. Like the build-up to Black Hawk Down was, the roads got extremely dangerous. It was a very tense environment. We were mortaring of our compounds, sniping. There were landmines in the road. The technicals, which were like Jeeps or SUVs with mounted heavy machine guns out, were running around all over. And it was a very dangerous place to operate.
Well, the reason why I said of personal, I was born in Somalia.
Ah.
Yeah, and we fled. I was very young, but 1991 was just a couple of years. But I've talked about this in a podcast before. But that incident, Black Hawk Down, was very pivotal for me and my family because at the time, before the Civil War started, my father was the head of counterintelligence in Somalia. And when we fled the country, my parents still believed that they could go back, and settle down, right? So when that happened, when Black Hawk Down happened, especially the scenes where they were dragging the soldiers through the streets, I remember my mom saying, like, there's no country to go back to after that scene.
It was definitely a devastating time.
And yeah, we lost a lot of family members to these militias too. So, but yeah, it was a very interesting time. I haven't watched that movie, I think, until last year.
He knew things that we didn't know. When I later watched the movie and the book, I found out that some of the things that we were seeing, he gave the historical background. The fact that Mogadishu was a wonderful tourist spot years before. And in fact, way back, I think, if I'm not mistaken, they were doing higher math there when people in Europe were basically still in the caves.
Yeah. No, it's a very interesting time. I mean, that's the best way I can explain it now because it's so long ago. But because Somalia obviously in the beginning was aligned with the Soviet Union after it got its independence. And then after the war on 77, the Ethiopia, it flipped to the US side. And I always make fun of my father because when he started out his career, he trained with KGB. And then when he was a senior officer, he trained with the CIA. And I always tell him, you have no loyalty.
Well, if you stay in the business long enough,
right?
Your friends become enemies and your enemies become friends.
Exactly. So you start off and you go to the Philippines. How is that further development? Like how does your career further?
Oh,
look?
well, it was interesting because while I was working at in my second job at the agency, was at the security duty office at CIA headquarters. And this is when terrorism touched me because I'm working our security operations center in the morning and working on my second cup of coffee, and the dispatch for our protective service, which were federal police officer. Guy from the dispatch opens the door and says, shots fired at the main gate and down. And I'm looking at this guy and I'm thinking, okay, he's kidding. And at that point, I hit the drop line to Fairfax County police and fire rescue and started the process for response, calling for ambulance. And what had happened was a Pakistani terrorist named Miramal Khan had come by. There's a turn lane going in the main headquarters. And he got into the turn lane and blocked it with his car. And then he got out and walked back with that shot in the video. It was a terrible event, the first time we ever really attacked. And this happened before. A lot of people don't know that we got it, or they don't remember that we got attacked that day. And it was very confusing because at first we thought maybe it's this guy, but boy, we didn't know what it was. Who kind of strangely, afterwards, he thought he was going to get caught. So he went to McDonald's and sat there for a while. Just like this guy.
Luigi Mangione.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of strange, but it's exactly what he did.
Yeah.
He was waiting to get picked up. And when he didn't get picked up, he just went back to his house, got to the airport, took a flight to Pakistan, and he hid out until a joint CIA and FBI operation drew him out of where he was hiding. We captured him, took him back to the States. So that was my first terrorism had struck. And to see what happens when an organization is hit like that, and it was incredible learning experience for me, crisis management.
Mm-hmm.
And then I posted or assigned to one of the teams going to Somalia, and we got hit when we were moving one of our protected. It was actually an ambush that was done on the Nigerian forces by members of ID's this technical group, and we just stumbled on to the remnants of their ambush, and they hit us, and our protectee got hit. We were able to successfully get him back to our hospital, save his life. He pretty much bled out by the time we got him there. He's a tough guy. He survived it, and that was the basis for my intelligence star. And kind of a crazy way to start your protection career with an ambush and an intelligence star. But from that moment on, I was doing assignments with them, starting out as a team member, a team leader, and then later on in my career, I came back to work with the POC before I turned into the GRS as a senior team. I was deploying to a variety of different places around the world. This unit was, as I said, clandestine in many ways. In terms of operations, it was clandestine. In other words, we were low profile. Nobody, the locals didn't know who we were and what we were doing. The local governments weren't really to speed on a lot of what we were doing, and it was classified.
Yeah.
Later on, when Benghazi hit, we got out into the public, and then the story came out about where we've been operating all these war zones all these years.
How was the change? Because you said you kind of climbed the ladder internally. within CIA into your role?
Was amazing because prior to the Kazi shooting, the front gate, and terrorism really picking up, it was a very regimented security career you'd be going through. Like I started out in doing personnel security, which was a background investigation. Then I went into more of a physical security thing, which was the security video op. And then the next posting might have been in a higher level of clearance where we're processing. But I ended up in the protection side, which prior to the POC being formed, really only consisted of us on two sides. One, the uniform division, which is the federal law enforcement personnel we have as our security, physical security around our sites, and the gentlemen and ladies that would provide security for our director and deputy director. So an executive protection unit, DCI security staff. So there was only those two little elements doing really the armed thing. Then all of a sudden this POC came in, and we started doing a lot of things. And then after that, the training, the experience I got, I ended up going into a counterterrorism unit, which is another unit that was completely classified, and it's still very much hush hush. Where I was trained to go out and surveil terrorist groups and provide information back and work with our case officers so they could work against the terrorist group. And one of the more notable experiences I had there was in Khartoum, Sudan, where I worked with a gentleman by the name of Billy Waugh, who just passed away last year.
Legend.
Living legend, yes. Yeah. And Billy wrote a book, which he didn't have approved, which was called Hunting the Jackal, which is his story of special forces, but it's also the story of how this unit found Carlos the Jackal operating in Khartoum. Nobody knew he was there. And found him, surveilled him, provided information, and then French services came and arrested him, and he's now in jail in France. So about a month or two after that happened, I was working with Billy in Khartoum, which was one of the most beautiful places in the world because it was like the vacation, the Club Med for terrorist group. It was a safe zone for them. So you name it, they were there. Hamas, Hezbollah,
Bin Laden.
Bin Laden was there. Yes,
Yeah.
He wasn't a big player at the time, but he was there. So they were all there, and when they get bored, they would come and play with us.
Yeah.
They would start doing like drive-bys on us, and finally they were told by the Sudanese government, do not do anything while you're here on your vacation. So they kept it under rest, but it was pretty hairy stuff.
It's interesting that you say that because when we had Rick Prado on the podcast, he talked about that story but accidentally he spotted the jackal. But obviously, yes, now it's a legendary story. When you were doing that detail, obviously now it's looking back, but in hindsight, could you have imagined the terrorism problem becoming that big as it and changing the culture so much as it?
One of the things you have to do to work in that environment and that world is you have to deep dive into it and learn as much as you can about the motivations and the history. And so we had a pretty good idea about radical fundamentalism and the fact that once they technically beat a superpower, the Russians in Afghanistan, the only other superpower was the U.S. And that we were going to be, target number one, and that their desire to create a worldwide caliphate was not going to go away. And so probably a never-ending problem. How successfully we manage it, that's the real kicker. But learning their mindset and their methodology was critical. As part of the training I got for protection work, it directly related back to terrorist activity because we studied something called the terrorist attack cycle. And it's the method used by basically any organized group that's going to do a crime or an assassination or kidnapping. And once you understand the kind of the standard method of operation that's used by all these people all around the world, then you start looking at the weaknesses in the cycle, and then you start targeting that, and that's surveillance. So my job doing surveillance on bad guys also had me doing counter surveillance for our people. So I'd be out looking for the bad guy, working for us.
So in your career, I mean, I've asked a lot of people that have a similar span of time that you spent at CIA. I think you might have a very unique perspective on this, but what did you think of this culture change going more towards the paramilitary side and a way of like the more standard case officer work?
Actually, a fascinating question. You know, during the World War II, the SOE, which is the British side, and the OSS, which is the Arkansas of the TIA, was a very war-centric group. They were all soldiers of one sort or another. Later on, after the CIA was created, the paramilitary side kind of diminished, and it became the Cold War game of spy. And that's what we jokingly call the cocktail circuit. That's where the spies go and meet each other in different embassies, and usually you don't kill the opposition. You might loosen their teeth a little bit or something, but you're not going to kill them. So the organization became less and less military, more and more intellectual, and our paramilitary side shrunk and just continued. No, there were growth spurts again, like during Vietnam, but then after that, it was dying out, and the CIA had a kind of an identity crisis. What's our main focus now? And what a lot of people don't know is we were actually switching over to something that's actually in some way bigger than terrorism, and that's international crime. We called it transnational crime, but we were all gearing up to change over to that. And then terrorism really hit. And so we got sidetracked out of that, and we started with the war on terror and all that. So culturally, we changed a lot. Now, here's the problem. Our career track, people who did very well and moved up, I mean, not like the way I phrased this, they became, the chiefs of stations and the heads of divisions. They were cocktail circuit people. And they didn't carry guns, and they didn't face the threats. We're going to kill you. They're not going to tickle you to get information. And, when you're talking about cartels, you're talking about terrorist groups and other criminal elements, they play for keeps. So weapon-wise, to give you an example, there were only two places in the world that actually were issued guns on a regular basis. Now, I give you a little idea. And they're not really pro-gun. Former case officers who worked the Cold War and the cocktail circuit, they really weren't pro-gun. In fact, the fact that the GRS survived is a testament to two things: the tenacity of the operators and their expertise, and the danger, the incredible danger that the organization has been subjected to. Because they may not like it, but they had to have it. So culturally, you had a very important point. And when you get a room full of these bigwigs, these chiefs of stations and all that stuff, and it's almost like you'd see the oil and water spread. You've got the European cocktail circuit guys and the war zone guys.
It's interesting because I've spoken to people that came through the growth of the paramilitary side, and guys like John, who came through more of the cocktail circuit. And it was very interesting to see, because you would see then the opposite of what you just described, where leadership now is changing more towards people with a paramilitary career or operations. And now, I mean, the threat now is being labeled peer adversaries, near peer adversaries, right? Where there might be a shift back again to the cocktail circuit again.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with it. It's appropriate to the environment. If your threat is more counterintelligence and intelligence collection without the murder that goes with terrorist activities and that, it's appropriate. And I don't have any I don't fault any of the group. It's just there are different responses to the environment.
In the and if you cannot talk about it, please
Sure.
tell me. But in the movie 13 Hours, what I found interesting was that, unlike yourself, a lot of the GRS operators were former military and had a different career track. How does that work?
Yeah, I'll explain the history of the unit and how we ended up
Mhm.
with the conglomerate that you saw in 13
Yeah.
Hours. When the POC was created, it was staffed with former military members that were already staff employed. It was a complete staff employee entity. So we had former military, Marines, Army, law enforcement people, a lot of our federal law enforcement trained security force. It's called SPS, Security Protective Service. That's our uniform division. They were part of it. And then what happened was, as the ops tempo became more and more regular, it was harder and harder to put the non-uniform rank, like myself, staffers who are working more of like the officer rank, to get out on these assignments. So it became more and more our uniform division guys taking the load, and they did a good job. But there was a limit. And then what happened was the war after 9/11, the need for that protection expanded dramatically, and we could not field it with just the internal. And actually, as we were getting closer to that period, that the requirements were getting to the point where we were actually starting to bring in what we call direct hires. So we'd hire people from Special Operations Unit, like Rangers, Special Forces. We get some Delta guys in that group. But one of the things that is difficult about doing protection work versus more traditional paramilitary or military, the activities are different. The mindset is different. You're not attacking anybody, and you're not trying to defend. You're in a run and hide mode. So some people, some military members had trouble with that. Others did well. And then after 9/11, we had so many requirements that we had to start hiring contractors. And that's where the Blackwaters came in and all these other groups, Triple Can and MDM, all that. And what we did was we would integrate the contractors in with our staff. So we would always have a staff officer with a certain number of contractors. One of the things that prevented us from getting in some of the trouble that State Department and the other group did, and I'm not telling you anything that's really out of school because it's you can read about it. When I was in Iraq, 405, State Department had a staff to contractor ratio of like 1 in 20. That's an impossible span of control. We kept it to a very tight number, never double digits. So you'd have one staffer and only a certain number of contractors. And we vetted our people much more stringent. So that's why it's a little different. And then 13 Hours, you see, now that movie was just some background. That movie was never approved.
Okay.
The book was never approved by the Publication Review Board. There were some gentleman agreements where basically, don't cross this line and we'll leave you alone. And just like a lot of things in Hollywood, they spun it a little to get more interest. I'm not taking anything away from the valor of the individuals and the tragedy of a loss of life that occurred. In fact, between the situation in Coast, where there was a suicide bomber that killed a number of our personnel, and Benghazi, that pretty much the largest number of GRS that we've ever lost. Now, if you think about all the wars and all the conflict we've probably been in that, I'm not going to go into detail about, over so many years, we're basically under. Now, there'll be people who will sit back and go, no way. You didn't even know you didn't know we were around. I mean, and that's a testament to the operational activity. Our job was to not be seen. When you run a protection detail with lights and siren, that's the exact opposite. So you're obviously going to be a much bigger target, and you're going to have a lot more interest in directive.
So you retire in 2013, and then what?
Oh, I worked the war zones. I worked every major war zone from 93 till 2013. And there was a point where I got into training, and I really liked training. So I would do training and then deploying and working in the war zone, training our people to go to the war zone. But there came a point where what was going to happen? They were going to put me to pasture back at headquarters. I was going to get calluses on my fingers from typing. And it came a point where I said, you know what? This is not quite where I want to be. I've done pretty much what I always wanted to do. So I decided to try the private sector a little bit, explore that area. And I wanted to get out of DC. I hubbed out of DC since 1989. I really never liked it. It's a rough place. Besides the traffic and everything else, it's a very ambitious place. And I never joined to be director. I was interested I wanted to do some different work. And some opportunities came up in the private sector. So I left, and I actually went out to Asia, and I was doing a protection job for a little while. And then I started doing personal safety training, because I found that the general public wasn't giving the level of training that I thought they could really use. And since I was so involved with that, helping our people learn to be safe, operating in not only in the war zone, but in the more benign environments like in Europe, America, and even in the U.S. I focused on that. That's where the situational learning.
And that's through your company, Pecora Consulting.
Yes. I worked closely with our Curie group. They were very early on that subject matter. We collaborated, and now since I'm out here, I just every once in a while I'll do something. So I'm doing stuff that's no danger, not interested in any danger. Don't have any cat lives left. But
and you wrote this book, and I read the book because we wrote the article on GRS. And after you gave us some pointers on that, do you have any interest in maybe doing more books in that space?
Yeah, I think I kind of would like to do something on the fiction side, but going to the publication review board, a bit like a dental visit, 2.5 years to get that book through. And I could wallpaper my living room with the black marks that they've retracted. But the book did some things for me, it put my career in perspective. It gave me a chance to look back. And it also, it gave me a unique opportunity to tell my story to my family. I was undercover for 23 out of 24 years. And going to war zones, you don't tell your family that you're going. Sometimes they learn, that when you spend a year in Iraq, So I got a chance to explain to them what I was doing. And
how did they respond?
It was funny. Even my colleagues who knew me my whole career didn't know about some of the stuff that I did. So they were shocked, to say the least. But I grew up reading James Bond and all the adventure stuff. So the agency gave me opportunities to do things that I just could not turn down.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I mean, the world at the moment is a bit of a crazy place, more so than ever. From your experience and your time doing this work, first, through what lens do you look at these things, these events? Do you see anything rhyming with the past? And second, sorry for the complicated question here, but second, like, how would you say you should prepare as a person has this background?
Well, I think those are great questions, because the old saying about if you don't know your history, you're bound to repeat it. And the truth is, if you're in the game long enough, you see the pendulum swing. You see the ebbs and flows. Sadly, when I came in 89, terrorism was really rampant. A lot of unstable countries in the middle. And then we got a level of stability. And now we're back to that unstable state-sponsored terror, countries that have got governments that are suspect at best. So we've gone right back into it. So we're going to have to do a lot of the same things we did before. I think that we need to be a lot more careful about involvement in certain areas. I think we need to leave certain countries to their own devices if they don't affect us, and keep our troops home as much as possible. So, but we've got to watch what's going on and look at everything that's happening now through the optic of what's happened before. So we can make better decisions. On the second part of your question, I think we cannot afford to be complacent anymore. We have, if you look at historical crime level, murder, rape, robbery, we've come to one of the safest times in the world in most of the Western countries. If you look at the crime rate, and this has made us vulnerable because we're less focused. And then you add on the technology that has really completely taken us out of our environment. We are lost in our cell phone and our iPad and our ear. And we are going into a pendulum swing where the threat is going to be higher and we can't afford to be caught. And then that other part that goes with the lowering crime, we have this mindset, a wrongful mindset that everything is fine, that nothing's going to happen to us. And we call that the denial mindset. And it's a very, very dangerous way of looking at life because you make yourself even more vulnerable. When the back of your mind, you don't believe anything's going to happen. Personal safety, time to take responsibility for your own safety and do something about it. And I'm not talking about going out and learning to be a commando or getting a black belt in BJJ, which I love, by the way. I'm a blue belt, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I love it. But it's more about being more cognizant of your environment and putting into practice in your daily life things that were going to make you safe.
And maybe even sometimes I'm guilty of this. Sometimes I feel like we're sleepwalking through a firestorm coming. And I remember my mom used to always say that unless you know how it is to be a refugee and have to flee your country and all this kind of stuff, it's very hard to imagine that it can happen to you, right? I do not really begrudge people that don't know, but as you said, it's also irresponsible to go through life like that. What do you think we should be doing at minimum to be prepared?
I think there's some super simple things. And some of this, I think the security industry, I'm going to talk a little bit out of school here. The security industry has gone kind of with the flow of the money and kind of abdicated some of their response. The general public is not ready to go through, a 6-month training course. We need to keep it realistic. So the training that people need is much more basic, and it's utilizing the skills that we already have. I mean, as an adult, we are absolute students of the human animal. We recognize to the point where it's in our subconscious. We're unconsciously reacting to the environment. The best example is driving. People who drive on the motorway, they don't realize that they're doing one of the most dangerous things they can do in a daytime. Traffic fatalities is one of the causes of death. But we don't think about it. But we've learned to drive. We're not paranoid, but we're aware if you're not texting and driving. And we are watching the other drivers around us while we're talking on the people in the car, listening to the radio. We're doing this as a matter of our daily life. And if we need to bring that level of skill and consciousness to the other parts of our life, when we're walking, when we're going to school, going to work, going shopping, and add a little bit of planning and a little bit of training, like something as simple as first aid training. To be CPR, but now they got AEDs, stop the bleed training. Very easy to learn, and it's a skill that you're going to use to help yourself, to help others, and then getting to know your environment, having a plan, plan A, plan B. So it's not difficult if you decide that you are going to take responsibility for your own safety and your family's safety, and you learn some of these skills. And the other part of that is it's a life skill that you need to pass on to your children. So you need to be training them to do this. And if you train them early enough, it's like training them to cross the street. It's you to look both ways, right? And adjust to the environment. When you're in England, which way do you look when you cross the street? What's the first direction you look, right? It's different than in America because the cars come in different directions. It's that level in some ways of basic training that people need. But until they realize they need it, and are convinced of it, sleepwalking. We're sleepwalking.
Yeah. It's interesting to see the difference between, I spoke with a friend yesterday who was born in Bosnia, and I haven't spoken to him in a while. And while we were talking, his father walked in, who consciously went through the breakup of Yugoslavia and the Civil War. And he asked me how I was doing and how the family was. And the first joke he makes is like, you're at the front lines of, Russia being aggressive. He said it in a joking way, but he also means it, right? And what I was mentioning to you about people that have been through that, they see the patterns and they see the things that are happening. And I think, as you said, just being aware of your surroundings, aware of, the language, what people are saying. And that's a simple thing, and instead of just watching TV shows, being a bit of a student of history as well as, what's currently going on in the world. If somebody wanted to follow a similar type career as you, what advice would you give them?
The first bit of advice that I learned the hard way was, university system is the bit. You need to look at it from a mathematical standpoint. Before you pick a major, make sure that people are employing it. Support the loans, et cetera, that you took out. The other part is try to get ahead of everybody else by getting into an internship, especially a paid internship. Now, if you're interested in the intelligence side, look around at universities that have a relationship with the intel services or have majors that they select people from. So already you're in the right pipeline. And then you can oftentimes get an internship with some of these organizations like the CIA. I know people who did internships in high school. And then a lot of that was because they were in the Washington, D.C. area. But later in the college, they did internships. And that got they got their foot in the door before anybody, even people like me who were recruited. That's a very specific way to get ahead. And it doesn't matter whether it's the intel service you want to get into security, or if you want to get into STEM, or you want to get into business. This formula is very effective at getting you in to see the right people with the right skill. And looking at the website, like right now you're at CIA.gov, look at what they're hiring and what jobs and what are the requirements, and read that with the idea that that's a recipe that you need to incorporate into your curriculum.
Absolutely. I think that's probably the most practical advice anybody has given in this podcast.
Some young family members I've been
there you go.
I've been trying to coach them.
Yeah. So we always ask towards the end of the podcast to each guest, what are they listening to? What are they reading? What are they watching? Can you give us any cultural recommendations?
Oh, this will be a funny one. I've restarted the X-Files, and I'm just through season 1, and it is scary how much the things from that show, and that's an old show, they had AI and the Internet of Things, they had robotics, these are all subjects of the episode. They have UFOs and drones, so timely. Bio labs. So all this stuff is like a repeat. So that's uncanny, and it's fun to watch. So I watch a lot of that stuff, kind of the old stuff. In terms of reading, I vacillate between. I like some of the newer mystery stuff, or like Jack Reacher type, because of the development of the characters and some interesting. When I want to read about more like my old work, I read a former agency guy write books, and Gary Eisler. And if you want a book that if you like assassin books and that kind of action, and you want to read how it's really done, the tradecraft, this guy, he writes it. It's incredible. So, movie wise, the best movie that probably Hollywood will ever put out is Zero Dark Thirty. That is the most accurate, and so that is a good one. Of course, Black Hawk Down was an interesting movie, so that's what I would recommend.
Oh, I like Zero Dark 30. I think they got like even help from the CIA to make that movie.
Yes, they did.
Yeah,
unprecedented access to not only SEAL Team 6, but also to the character Maya.
Yeah,
I work with her in practice.
Interesting. What was the portrayal a bit correct?
Personality-wise, spot on. In real life, she didn't get blown up or shot at.
Yeah, fair enough.
But it's interesting because she's part of a new breed of analysts in the field, and it brought to life the how useful this new collaboration is between the analysts, the operators, the case officers, the military, everything working together, how effective they are.
It seems like every day there's a new show or movie on that world. So it's I guess people are really interested in it. I was talking yesterday with John about the Lioness.
Yeah, or the
think
Old Man. That's another one.
The Old Man is great. Yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah. The very first episode with Jason that we did the podcast, he was the one who recommended The Old Man the first season. That's when we started the podcast. But I can recommend the Lioness too. It's I'm surprised how much, especially the acronyms, that they get right. That was
the Jack Ryan stuff. I watched the first episode and I was just, my jaw hit the floor. There's so many things that they were, so close to spot on. It's like, ooh, this is a little scary.
I mean, the first season, I think on the new series, the first season was amazing. I think that was like really good. I think that it kind of trailed off a bit. Was not really well received, but this is something also that we see all the time, where when we put something out, an article or report, where we get all these comments like, "Oh, you don't know what you're talking about," and I said, "Well, we actually spoke to the people that did this, so I think we get it better than most." But I wanted to, thank you so much. It was really a pleasure talking to you and getting your insights. I think we could have done easily another hour. But I appreciate really your time and sharing your story. Where can people find you if you want to be found?
I'm on LinkedIn.
Okay.
I comment and I write articles. People want to learn about situational awareness and personal safety things. I write a lot of content on there. I just posted something on personal safety and vehicle as a weapon response, what to do. I've written some counter ambush for civilian, what you can do if you're ambushed. So I provided a lot of content on there, and I've taken I've read a lot of interesting things that other people have done. So I'm reciprocating. So cool. That would be a good way to get some information about situational awareness and personal safety.
I'll add that to the podcast notes, and I think you're probably one of the foremost experts I would listen to for that kind of stuff. So.
I stand on the shoulders of giants.
Yeah,
truly. Sure. That is the way. I look back on the people I was lucky enough to work with, like Billy Y, and Rick Prado, and people like that I got to learn from. And anybody who says it's bad to meet your idols, wrong.
Yeah,
it's exhilarating.
I would have loved to speak to Billy Ward. I don't know who did it, but there was a memorial page for him, and there was some pictures on there, and the pictures were crazy. I don't know if you saw it, but I was like, wow, it was very interesting. I don't know if it's still up, but really, his career and the images that they put up was very interesting. Again, thank you so much, Tom.
My pleasure.
Have a great rest of your day, and speak soon.